Good evening to all. Today, I welcome you all on behalf of Madras Tax Bar for our 137th webinar by Nivedita, who's another young member of our bar. So today, again, we are going to hear on a very interesting topic, which I'm sure that a lot of us wouldn't have heard about, which is the doctrine of parents patri. I mean, this is a very interesting topic taken up by Nivedita, and I am glad that we are going to learn more on this topic by her. So we are looking forward from hearing from you, Nivedita. All the best for your lecture, and I request all of the participants to kindly keep their mic muted, and at the end of the talk, we can have our discussion round as well. So over to you, Nivedita, and good luck. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Prithvi. Thank you to everybody who's come for the meeting. So I'm going to, for all of you who don't know, I'm Nivedita Mehta, and I am going to try to throw some light on this doctrine, that is the doctrine of parents petri. Parents petri literally translates into parent of the nation, and it had been conceived in 13th century England, and at that time it was the king who was said to be the father of the nation or the father of the people, and it was his job within this scope, within under this doctrine, to take care of and to be a parent to those who don't have rights of their own or who are unable to defend themselves. This has evolved over time, and it has evolved even in India. And it is the power of the state to intervene against abusive, negligent parenting, a legal guardian, appoint a caretaker, and act as a parent for anybody who doesn't have a voice of their own. It is sometimes also a supervisory jurisdiction of the courts. The doctrine of parents petri has been defined by Black's dictionary as the state regarded as a sovereign, the state in its capacity as provider of protection to those unable to care for themselves, to a doctrine by which a government has a standing to prosecute a lawsuit on behalf of a citizen, especially on behalf of somebody who is under a legal disability to prosecute the suit. The state ordinarily has no standing to sue on behalf of its citizens unless a separate sovereign interest will be served by the suit. So a bare reading of the above definition will show that the concept of parents petri has two distinct arms to it. The first arm being that of a caregiver and a protector of those who cannot protect themselves. That is a non sui juris person, somebody who cannot represent themselves in courts of law or who need protection by the state. The second aspect of this definition is where the state acts as a representative of its citizens in foreign courts to defend its citizens against foreign bodies in courts situated abroad. This concept of parents petri gets its legitimacy from the preamble of the Constitution, the fundamental rights, and the directive principles of state policies. It is something that is used in it is the basis for a lot of welfare legislations. So this is what gives the humane angle to most welfare legislation, and is what makes sure that the legislature and the judiciary act with the care necessary and with the same compassion necessary which a parent would act towards a child in ensuring that the rights of the most vulnerable portion of our society is protected. It has been referred to as the bridge between life and law. That is, that it gives law the bridge to ensure that the life it meets the necessity of the day-to-day life of people who are actually vulnerable. Now, from this, I've gone through a bunch of judgments, and broadly, there's a very wide scope to the doctrine of parents petri. But it has been applied by the Honorable Supreme Court and various high courts in a number of different situations. And broadly, I have categorized the application of the doctrine to 6 broad headings, and I'll elaborate on those headings. I'll just list the 6 broad headings. 1A, which is the most common use, that is in guardianship cases or child abuse cases. B, in the representation of citizens' rights abroad. C, in regulating public trust, or any public trust, be it religious or charitable. D, mentally for representing mentally unsound people, and E, care for vulnerable citizens, and F, for the care of animals and any other being that is unable to represent itself. Now I will elaborate on each of these. First, that is the most common. This participatory as a doctrine has been used by various courts most regularly in guardianship cases and child abuse cases. So, as for the guardianship and so in exercise of participatory, the rights of the father as the legal guardians are respected, but controlled to an extent by the courts. So in the case of, so we all assume that as a parent we are automatically guardians of our children, when in fact it is the sovereign which is the guardian of all children and disabled people, and it is through legislation that we all get our rights as parents to be guardians of our children. So in the case of Mede Dalavoy T. Kumaraswamy versus Mede Dalavoy Rajamma, AIR 1957, Madras 563, it has been stated by the Madras High Court that as per Hindu law, the guardianship of the minor is in rests for the sovereign as participatory. This is a principle that is even reflected in the Manusmriti and by in the text of Gautama. Therefore, it's an age-old concept by which it is actually the sovereign or the state which has to be the primary caregiver for any minor or somebody who cannot care for their own rights. And from there, they appoint a parent to act on their behalf as the guardian for the children. So contrary to popular belief, children are not our property whom we can lord over, and it is subject to some form of regulation. In the case of Neel Ratan Kundu versus Abhijit Kundu, 2008, 9 SCC 413, the best interest principle was elaborated on. Over the course of various custody disputes, it has been held that the rights of the parents are only secondary, and it is in fact the best interest of the child that is paramount in determining who gets guardianship over children. The Honorable Supreme Court has traced the entire evolution of the guardianship law and has held categorically that unless the best interest of the child is met, there is no scope for the rights of the parents are in fact secondary or if at all irrelevant. In this case, this case had to do with the rights of this case was filed as a guardianship suit was filed by a father who towards his seeking guardianship of his child, physical custody and guardianship of his child who was living with his grandparents. It was found that since the father was in fact accused in the dowry the death of the mother of the child, the best interest of the child was met since he was living with his grandparents. In another very interesting case, in the case of Arushi Dhasamana versus Union of India 2003 9 SCC 475, it has been held that the least detrimental test also has to be applied. That is, this had to do with conjoined twins and the operation of conjoined twins to separate them and the risks involved in the surgery. It was held that since since the surgery was extremely risky, whether the state should intervene, and they held that since it is the least detrimental if the children are in fact separated, the least detrimental test has to be applied in the rights of children. Now from there, that is from guardianship of children to the rights of children and the protection of children, it is the duty of the state to ensure that every child in this country is protected from abuse or any form of molestation or rape. And that is something that we assume to be the absolute truth. But unfortunately, we are in a situation in which a number of children face sexual harassment and assault every single day. So in the case of Shankar Kishan Rao versus State, 2013, 5 SCC 546, it has been held by the Honorable Supreme Court that the Supreme Court, as parents' secretary, has a duty to protect children from sexual abuse, and this has to be applied, therefore, to all POSCO cases in which the welfare of the children has to be approached with first, and We have to ensure that children are not subject to the humiliation of court, and that you act as a parent would, the state and the courts act as a parent would to a child who is wrong, and the interests of the child are best met. In fact, this would have been this ought to have been brought to the attention of the judge in the Nashik court, who passed a very unfortunate order in the POSCO matter. The second set of cases, which is again commonly used, is the representation of citizens in litigation abroad. The authority in this is drawn from the judgment of Charan Lal Sahu, which is reported in 1991 SCC 613. This case challenged the validity of the Bhopal Gas Leak Processing of Claims Act 1985. This act was enacted to represent the victims of the Bhopal gas tragedy in the courts situated in America. For those of you who don't know, in 1984, December 2nd, 1984, the Bhopal gas tragedy, in the Bhopal gas tragedy, extremely noxious gas leaked from the Union Carbide factory in Bhopal, and a lot of thousands of people living in tenements around the around the factory in Bhopal suffered a lot of them died and suffered from extreme health crises, which they are facing till date. A number of lawyers came from America seeking to represent these victims in civil suits for damages instituted in America, and these people were referred to as ambulance chasers by the Honorable Supreme Court. That is, they made claims for fees based on the amount of settlement that they managed to get for the victims. However, the state intervened and passed the act which is under challenge, and said that they have the absolute authority to represent all victims in all civil suits, whether in India or abroad, and enter into settlements on behalf of the victims. A number of victims challenged the validity of the act, claiming that they have that this would be an infringement of Article 21, that is their right to life and right to life, since they had the right to defend themselves and make claims on their own without the intervention of the state. The Supreme Court dismissed the writ petition challenging this on the ground that the state was very much within its power and jurisdiction as parents petri to represent the various victims before foreign courts, since it would have been a very expensive process, and most of the victims were in fact extremely downtrodden people who didn't have access to legal aid and legal welfare. Then I now go to the third category of cases, which is regulating public trusts, both religious and charitable. This was something I did not expect to find within the scope of parents petri, but it has been held in the case of the executive officer Ardhanarishwarar Temple versus R. Satyamurthy, 1999 3 STC 115, that the courts have a general parents petri jurisdiction over trust for charitable and religious purposes, and the question of especially when the question of public interest is involved. They have held in this case that since charitable, any public institution, whether it's charitable or religious, is in operation, it has to do with the welfare of people who don't have a voice, namely either the downtrodden or religious embodiments of gods. And even the embodiments of gods don't have a voice other than that of the court, and therefore the courts could intervene. This is also reflected in Section 92 of the CPC, of the Civil Procedure Code, which permits the challenge of public trusts, about management of public trust, and this is reflective of the fact that any public trust has to have transparent functioning, since it deals with the most vulnerable sections of society. The fourth category is mentally unsound people. The fourth category is mentally unsound people, and the landmark judgment in this regard is Aruna Shanbhag reported in 2011 for SCC 454. In this case, this case had to. I suppose most of you would have heard of this case, and that is that this had to do with a young nurse who was raped, brutally raped by a ward boy, and was left in a vegetative state for 35 years. She was languishing in the vegetative state for 35 years, and somebody who claimed to be her next of friend actually approached the Honorable Supreme Court seeking euthanasia of her as a humanitarian, as a humanitarian thing to do. The Honorable Supreme Court went into detail and about euthanasia, the kinds of euthanasia, that is both active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. And in this case, they wanted to cut off her food supply, that is, stop feeding her, and said that that would be the most humane thing to do. However, a lot of nurses who took care of her said that she still had a sense of taste and smell and was not completely, her brain stem was not dead, that is, she was not brain dead. And therefore, one could not say that she was completely dead and unconscious of her senses. And therefore, the question of euthanasia would not come into being. So in this, the court examined the principle of participatory in detail, and it was held that for people such as Aruna Shanbhag, who were in a vegetative condition and who could not take decisions regarding their life and death and whether to withdraw treatment or not, it was in fact the court in its jurisdiction within the participatory principle who had to exercise this right and who had to exercise their jurisdiction and determine whether in fact euthanasia would have been possible, whether passive euthanasia would be possible in this case or not. And India has no legislation with regard to euthanasia. So euthanasia, as far as the law is concerned, is in fact still illegal, and the right to die doesn't come within the scope of Article 21, which is the right to live. So the Honorable Supreme Court has said that since she had no next of kin that survived her, it was in fact the Honorable Supreme Court that would have to decide this. Another very interesting case with regard to people who are mentally unsound and the role of the Honorable Supreme Court in navigating the rights of mentally unsound people is the case of X versus the state of Maharashtra, 2019, 7 SCC 1. In this was a criminal case, and the case was filed seeking to commute the death sentence ordered to the appellant to a life sentence. The case is a rather gory one in which the accused in the case had brutally raped and murdered 2 young children and was sentenced to death by both the lower court and the high court. In the review application filed before the Honorable Supreme Court, it was argued that the accused was mentally unsound and was suffering from schizophrenia, and therefore on humanitarian grounds, it should be commuted from his death sentence should be commuted to a life sentence. It was the Honorable Supreme Court argued the role it plays. I mean, the Honorable Supreme Court set out the law with regard to the rights of mentally unsound people and the scope of participatory even in sentencing. They said that it was held in this case that even for sentencing, the mental condition of the person should be taken into account at the time of sentencing. It has been held that mental health of the accused should be taken into account at the time of sentencing, and mental illness is a mitigating factor in commuting the death penalty to a life sentence. And the Honorable Supreme Court has held that within its participatory jurisdiction, it cannot allow anybody to just rot away in jail or suffer because of mental illness. The 5th category is a very wide scope of participatory, and that is the care for vulnerable citizens who are in any manner unable to secure their own rights. The first case which discusses this very interesting principle is the Tamil Nadu Center for Public Interest Litigation versus the State of Tamil Nadu, 2017, 6 SCC 734. It deals with the role of the government in farmer suicides. So it has been held by the Honorable Supreme Court that even when it is found that citizens of your state, or the most vulnerable citizens or the downtrodden citizens of your state are suffering in any manner, and that is leading them to suicide in a mass scale, it is the job of the government to act in its role as parents patri and ensure that the interests of its poorest sections of society are taken care of. And the other very unfortunately applicable uses of parents patri, especially today, given the COVID situation and the number of people who are suffering extremely poor health, that is slipping into comas or who are on ventilators, is the application of parents patri in appointing a guardian to secure rights of somebody who is in a comatose condition or in a vegetative state. Very often, we don't plan for what happens. We don't want to think of or plan for what happens when we go into a vegetative condition, or when we are, or when what would happen to our rights when we are unable to make decisions for ourselves. So one fine day, somebody who is very healthy and active may either suffer a brain stroke or be hit on the road while walking, or has suffered from COVID and put on a ventilator, who then takes decisions on his behalf, or who then manages to source money from the bank accounts and pay for medical treatments. That has been gone into in detail by a number of judgments from 2007, from 2018, from 2018, 19, and 20 onwards. The honorable various high courts have gone into this. The honorable Supreme Court has not yet dealt with such a case. There is the Honorable Madras High Court in the case of Mohammad Rafi versus State of Tamil Nadu has held that WP number 28435 of 2015 has held that the wife is the best suited person to take care of the affairs of the husband, and in its jurisdiction as parents patri, they have appointed the wife to be the guardian of the husband who is in a comatose condition. In the case of Rajini Hariom Sharma, and that is in the Bombay High Court, 2020 SCC Online, BOM 880, and various other cases of the Delhi High Court and the Kerala High Court, that is in the Allahabad High Court, in the case of Uma Mittal versus Union of India, it has been held that the courts have to act within their scope, within their capacity as parents patri in appointing the wife or the closest known relative as the guardian of somebody who is in a comatose condition. They've also discussed the scope of Article 226, that is the role of the high courts play in appointing the guardian. And it has been held that one doesn't need to go to a civil court, which is a slightly more lengthy process, in order to get a declaration of guardianship, since it would be failing in its duty by dragging on the case, and that the court is within its powers of parents patri. And in fact, it is a duty of the court to appoint a guardian for people who are in this comatose condition. Moreover, it was held that for people who are in a comatose condition or who are in a vegetative condition, the Guardians and Wards Act would not apply. The Mental Health Act would not apply. The National Trust Act for the Welfare of Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Mental Retardation, and Multiple Disabilities Act would not apply. Persons with Disabilities, Equal Opportunities, Protection and Rights, and Full Participation Act 1995 will not apply. The Mental Health Care Act of 2017 will not apply, and the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 will also not apply. So when there is no explicit or specific legislation to take care of the interests of the most vulnerable sections of our society, it is the job of the courts to, in fact, or it is the role of the courts to assume jurisdiction as parents patri under Article 226 or under Article 32, and ensure that the rights of these people are met. And the last head under which I found the parents patri has been applied is animal welfare. So in the case of Animal Welfare Board of India versus A. Nagaraj, 2014, 7 SCC 475, the concept of parents patri has been applied even to ensure that the rights of animals are also secured, since they are unable to take care of themselves as against human beings. This case actually had to do with Jallikattu and about the legality of Jallikattu and whether it would be violative of the Prevention of Cruelty Act, Cruelty to Animals Act or not. And the courts have held that it is in fact their jobs to delve into or to apply the principle of participatory in protecting the rights of animals who cannot protect themselves, especially when there's cruelty that is being afflicted upon them. Now, this is the wide scope of participatory, and it is in fact something that is used to ensure that the welfare of citizens is met and that the government acts as a loving parent in ensuring that the rights are met of every citizen, especially the citizens who do not have a voice of their own. However, sometimes, as every parent, courts can go wrong and can overreach their can over and can overreach the definition or expand the definition of participatory to cases where they're not applicable. The first case in which this has happened is Anuj Garg versus Hotel Association of India. Uh, in this case, Section 30 of the Punjab Excise Act was challenged, in which this act basically prevented women and people below the age of 25 from working in any institution which served alcohol. And in the whole, and especially women, and as women were completely excluded from the scope of working in any building in which alcohol was served. This was challenged before the Honorable Supreme Court, and the Honorable Supreme Court has very clearly held that even participatory is not beyond the scope of judicial scrutiny. Therefore, when it is found that in exercise of participatory, the Honorable Supreme Court, that the legislation or legislation or even the judgment has violated another fundamental right, and in this case, Article 14, the right to equality, and Article 19, the right to employment, the right to enterprise, it has gone beyond the scope of participatory and has misused the concept of participatory and has in fact violated the fundamental rights of the women and people below the age of 25. And it has been on the Honorable Supreme Court has also said that most all adult thinking people, both men and women, know what they're doing, and the courts cannot interfere beyond a point in moral policing or regulating them in all their day-to-day actions. Very recently, an extremely controversial case also had dealt with the proposition of the scope of participatory. That is the Love Jihad case, or Shafin Jahan versus Ashokan, 2018-16 STC 408. This had to do with a habeas corpus writ was filed by Ashokan, the father of a girl, who had, at the age of 24, decided to convert to Islam and marry a man, and it was claimed by the father that she was a victim of some sort of mythical concept called love jihad. The Honorable Supreme Court came down and the Honorable Kerala High Court passed an order in this case nullifying the marriage and asking a 24-year-old young woman to go back to her father in a habeas corpus writ. The Honorable Supreme Court struck down the order of the Honorable Kerala High Court and has used rather strong language and called it a sanctuary of errors, and has held that it violated Article 21 of the young woman, and the court cannot facilitate an oppressive parent and act as and claim that is participatory. The reasoning of the Kerala High Court was that it was in participatory power that the daughter was asked to go back to the parents' house and nullified the marriage. But the Honorable Supreme Court has categorically held, the three-judge bench of the Honorable Supreme Court has categorically held that participatory cannot be exercised as a suppression of Article 21 of an adult person. And again, this would also not satisfy the best interest of test of participatory. With that, I think I've covered most of what I wanted to say about participatory. But now I think the from this you can see that it's an extremely broad application of a very interesting, humane doctrine that ensures that everybody, that all state machinery approaches the law with a certain degree of empathy and with seeing human beings involved and not just statistics. So based on this, I think we can agree that that there is further room for building on the concept of parents per tree, and and there is no absolute application of the same. I would call upon when I read about parents per tree, I was in fact the first thing I thought of was the migrant crisis that we all saw unfold before us last year at the same time. That is thousands of people who, with the sudden lockdown, were forced to walk to their villages and left without employment and were starving and were hungry. The legislature and the court and the various wings of the state can or could have stepped in and exercised their jurisdiction in parents per tree and ensured that people were taken care of and had their basic needs met. Further, I will go so far as to extend the application of parents per tree to take care of, in fact, the most vulnerable section of society which doesn't exist yet, and that is our future generation. Today, the way we are using or abusing the planet, I don't think there's going to be too much left for those who come after us. And in its scope as parents per tree, courts and the legislature can ensure that we don't damage our planet, our earth and planet to the point where the rights of the unborn are nullified before they even begin, and their right to clean air and healthy water and clean water and healthy and day-to-day healthy lives are not thwarted by our actions today. And therefore, I would go so far as to say that even in enactment of environmental laws and implementation of environmental laws, the doctrine of parents per tree would apply, and that this would, in fact, it is also a tool for all of us to use to ensure that the rights of the most marginalized or people without voices are met, and that the rights of these people are taken care of. Yes. So with that, I'd like to conclude. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and being such a patient and kind audience. And now, anybody has any questions?
Thank you so much, Nivedita, on taking on the really interesting topic on the doctrine of parents per tree. I mean, as you've concluded it really well by saying that, like, all the application of this doctrine would indeed become a very important factor in the coming years, seeing the abuse to the nature and everything. Thank you very much once again. I call upon the participants to put in their views, and if there is anything more to be shared or supplemented, you are most welcome to come forward. And Dr. Krishnanand sir, if you have anything to add.
I just was reminded about a movie that I saw quite some time back. The movie came even before you were born, Nivedita. It's a movie called Whose Life Is It Anyway? If you have the chance to that movie, it talks about one of the points you spoke about, when you're in a vegetative state, you're not able to take a decision, who takes the decision for you? That's a movie which you would like to see, because basically when you spoke about this topic, I was immediately reminded about that movie which I saw when I was in college. So it basically is bordered on this. And then the court decides that, yes, he is capable of taking his own decision. And of course, it was not euthanasia. The moment you stop medication, he will die. But the most important part of the entire movie, like you said about the Shanbog case, was that he was paralyzed below the neck. And he was basically a sculptor and an artist. And he wanted to die because he could not use his hands. So then he tried whatever he could, nothing happened, so he had to move court. So the court then appointed 2-3 a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and other people to evaluate whether he is in control of his senses or not. And then the court finally decided that yes, he is in control of his senses, and he is taking whatever decision he wants to take, which is exactly what the court said in Leela Shanbhag case. Only thing the difference was that she was in a coma. Here he was aware of what was happening. The court
Vegetative state. Vegetative.
yeah, vegetative means she was not aware of what is happening
Yes.
around her.
Yes.
This case, this guy was fully aware. Only thing was just completely paralyzed. So the court finally decided that he's in control of his faculties, he's in control of his senses, and it is his decision to live or die. Of course, we don't have the law of euthanasia like you pointed out. So then the court ultimately decides that, okay, he doesn't want to take medication, he may be permitted to do so. So the doctor who argued the case for the hospital and against his not wanting to take medication, asked him for one request, because the judges get up and walk out after the court hall, which was convened in the hospital itself. So the doctor says, I want to wheel you back to your bed. So he says, no, you'll start sticking those needles back into me. So the doctor says, no, once the court has taken a decision, I cannot go beyond the law. So in the end, what the guy says, he asks the doctor, why? The doctor says, I still feel you will change your mind. You know, even after a decision that he can die, he has a right to die. This is what this entire topic that you spoke about means. You know, that there is somebody who has to take care of you when there is nobody to take care of you, even if you are in your senses. So I think saner advice and saner people ought to take care of others. Thanks for the topic. A very good presentation, Nivedita.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else, if they want to share their view?
Yeah, here, Satish here.
Yes, sir. Satish, sir.
Nivedita, can you have some inlight to throw some light on right of prisoners who are condemned,
Yes.
who are facing the death row,
Yes.
etc., etc.
Yes.
Can this concept and doctrine also take care of that
Yes.
situation? Yes.
Yes, so that in that case which I had cited, that is X versus the state of Maharashtra. In that they had commuted, the Supreme Court had commuted a prisoner who was in jail, who was on death row for a rather heinous crime, to life imprisonment only because he was mentally unwell, and it was held even there that the courts have to exercise participatory even to prisoners. And that simply because you're in jail, you don't go beyond you cannot be abused and treated poorly and be left to the mercy of God knows what. And the state cannot abandon its role even in jail. And that mental health of prisoners was also to be attended to. And they were the Mental Health Care Act of 2017 would be applicable even to prisoners, and that this would be again an exercise of participatory.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would like to call upon Natarajan, sir, to kindly give his views on this. Natarajan, sir?
Yeah, 1 minute. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, Nivedita. A concept which we all of us have for long forgotten after our college days. You gave a refreshing touch to your old doctrine. And being a member of the tax bar, I can't but help to think how best we, the tax lawyers, can make best use of this particular doctrine. Yes, it is very much helpful to us also, especially in the context of GST. All the taxpayers who are all the partners of progress in our country, all of a sudden they have been exposed to a completely new tax regime in 2017, which is completely new. They have been taken off the guard, and it is more based on this technology, and where it will take some time to get used to all those things. In such a situation, the government has got, as per this doctrine, parents patry, they should have adopted a hand-holding approach, at least for the initial 3 to 4 years, in helping in all the way. But unfortunately, that has not happened. Be it taking the transitional credit or the strict time limit Recently, we have seen around 200 crore has been collected by the government by way of late fees alone. So definitely in all our future endeavors to secure justice to our clients, we should also, as tax lawyers, we should also make use of this particular doctrine, where it is the duty of the government to handhold the assessees, especially when a new tax regime is introduced with a lot of complications. And this enlightening has come after your session. And thank you for. Thank you, Prithvi.
Thank you, Natarajan sir. So, anyone else wants to share something of their views on this?
Prithvi, I want to ask Nivedita something.
Sure, sir.
How did you choose this topic?
So actually, it was two things. One is we were dealing with the case of somebody who was in a coma, and that introduced me to the concept and the application of participatory in appointing a guardian. And I have to say, Honorable Justice Abdul Quddus actually passed an extraordinary order without and secured the interest of the comatose person at the time of admission itself. And actually, the principle of justice should not be done, but also must appear to be done, was evident in the order passed by the Honorable Madras High Court. But after that, I wanted to know more about the concept and the application, because it seemed to be a semi-legal concept, which is that it's a legal concept, but it also reminds us that we are not dealing with laws in isolation, and that it is in fact grounded in humankind, which we as professionals itself, we tend to forget that half the time. We see everything in isolation and in only legal theory, when it is in fact the rights of people and the interests of people that are paramount.
Nivedita, one last question.
Yes, sir.
What about transgenders?
Yes, absolutely. Their rights are very often forget rights. I think their existence we tend to wish away. The state Honorable Justice Radhakrishnan of the Supreme Court passed a very enlightened order allowing them to be identified as the third gender, but their day-to-day rights are simply their right to life and living in dignity itself is not something that the state even bothers to ensure. And this, I think, the concept of doctrine of participatory will be applicable to them. And in fact, I think a public interest litigation based on this doctrine and can be filed seeking for the state to act to protect the rights of some of the most abused people in our country.
I think you should take the step.
I'd very happily do so.
Do that.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Nivedita, for this talk. I mean, the choice of topic was really very interesting, and it has opened our minds a lot to this particular doctrine and its applicability, given the time in which we are living in. I mean,
Prithvi,
yes, sir.
Prithvi, sorry for interruption.
Oh, no, sir.
Before today, did you know this topic?
To be very honest, sir, not very much.
99% of the people who are listening to the lecture have never heard of this till today.
Yeah, I googled and find out.
Krishnanan. Exactly. Krishnanan. முத்து ஒரு செகண்ட் எனக்கு தெரிஞ்சு இதுக்கு பர்ஃபெக்ட் ஜோக் என்னன்னா, தேங்காய் ஸ்ரீனிவாசன் தில்லுமுல்ல சின்ன இத்தனை ராகங்கள் இருக்குங்கிறது எனக்கு இன்னைக்கு வரைக்கும் தெரியாது. அந்த மாதிரிதான் இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு டாக்டிங் இருக்குன்னு எனக்கு தெரியாது.
I agree. That's why I asked her.
Absolutely
What's this topic?
இத ஏபிஎஸ் கொஞ்சமாவது படிச்சிருப்பேன், சுத்தமா தெரியல. என்ன பயத்துல வந்து உட்காந்துனா
in the afternoon, I had Googled how to pronounce this particular.
Exactly. That is one mistake you did, Nivedita. Pronunciation. You tell me how do you pronounce it?
Participatory.
Petri.
Yeah.
Petri. Yeah.
Petri.
That's the
So
pronunciation.
that extra E is a little extra effort. So it tends to be forgotten.
Hey, Adu,
The
nee-
extra
Yeah,
is
no,
Google
why
is
do
a
we
pathya.
use-
From morning, we were all Googling to try to find out what the topic is all about. We've never heard about this at all. Thanks, yeah. Thanks. Thanks for a good question.
I have also no hesitation to accept that I did not heard of this term earlier. And one more thing, this principle of humanitarianism is quite opposite to tax laws. Where we are only butchered, we are to be butchered. If you fall in line, you get it. Otherwise, you are thrown out. This is not known to much of the tax law professionals. Thanks very much. You have done it very well. You have inculcated a lot of humanitarianism in us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. In fact, I thought that this topic will particularly confine mainly to guardianship because the meaning of it made me think only to that extent. But then after your talk, now it is very clear that how wide this doctrine is. So thank you very much on this topic. It has given a lot of scope.
Actually, one small question to Nivedita. One thing,
Sure, sir.
because you
Sure,
just
sir.
talked about the guardianship and everything. In the COVID situation, suppose if the parents die,
Yes.
the kid becomes
Yes.
an orphan, and one of my
Yes.
friends is a member of the child rights who is in Pune by name Dr. B. Ramraj. He has written an article. How they will be taken up, whether this act will have an application on anything on this.
The approach, as in the doctrine will be ought to be, let me put it this way, this doctrine ought to be applied in determining who the best suited guardian for this child is.
All this.
You have
That is
to supplement Swaminathan. Are you willing up to take up a case? I have an identical situation where there are two children whose
Yes.
parents died.
Yes,
Her uncle and aunt are living in the US.
yes,
They are having certain difficulties in adoption.
yes,
They obviously are the next of kin
yes,
as the kids are concerned.
yes,
So I just got a mail this morning from the US saying that can you help?
yes,
And luckily this topic came up. I will forward the mail to your mom's ID.
yes.
Just go through the papers and get back to me on that.
Sure, I'll do that.
Krishnanand, this is the hot topic as of today that we could not give an answer to those people how they suffer. Definitely it will be helpful so that we can give it to Nivedita.
Kids are pretty young, young kids. So it becomes very difficult. Thank you, Swami, for reminding me of that. It just struck me just now.
I think Nivedita can write an article and publish.
On this.
It will be a help to the general public at a lot.
Swaminathan sir,
Need for the time.
exactly, I put that in the group. In this pandemic time of people losing life,
Yes, yes.
I put it in the group also. And
That's
Prithvi,
great.
Prithvi, you don't have to worry. You are better off than us. At least you have thought of guardianship and guardian law, which is somewhat related to this.
Krishnanand, sir, my
Absolutely
friend
no
Mr.
proof for
B.
it.
Ramaraj, he is a member of the Child Protection Act as per the Tamil Nadu. This one he is in Payani. He has written an article on this issue that what is the situation, how the adoption should be taken up and all those things. He has given a writing to the BBC also. Just ask him to give that article or something.
Please.
Forward it.
Sir, I also read one law of care
Interesting.
and one more adoption law. Previously it was CARE and some other four-letter English words. Recently only I came across after I saw that WhatsApp message, some children orphaned in Coimbatore, somebody was asking whether anybody can take a guardianship of that. Later on, their family itself took over the
Took over.
children. That was on care. That means the close relative, there is a different law. If it is an outsider, there's a different law.
Yes. Actually, so there were some WhatsApp forwards that were going around which were completely fake news about how you contact somebody and they get adopted and something of that sort was going on, but that's actually not how orphan children are taken care of.
Anyway, thank you. You taught us a new subject. We will look into it more deep in future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this has also been one of the highlights of our webinar series where we always try to come up with some extraordinary topics like this, which which opens so much school of thoughts on a lot of other aspects other than our usual bread and butter. So this is a really very good topic, and this again will be put up in our YouTube channel, and it could be shared to a lot of people also who are not in this particular field, because this topic is of general importance as well. So thank you very much, Nivedita, and congratulations.
Quickly, I'd like to just thank APS sir for the encouragement and for the encouragement for doing a presentation.
You all keep congratulating him and praising him all the time.
Yeah.
He is our forerunner
Yes.
who has created the whole structure for all of you to come in and share your views. And I must also
what is the next webinar?
I must also congratulate you for selecting this topic so that others do not know much of question. You drive freely on a free road.
So they say you shouldn't preach to the choir. So I didn't come with the tax topic.
That way you are very intelligent like your mom. Very good.
Same, the imitation and the style of pronunciation and the way of
Yes, I
presentation.
could see your mom
Like
in you
your
when
mother.
you speak.
Exactly.
Sir, kindle பண்ணாதீங்க sir. Look at the way she's laughing.
இல்ல சார், இல்ல அதே மாதிரிதான் இருந்தது. இன்னொரு clone Maithili is present.
Probably she was giving a dubbing voice from the backside.
இல்ல எனக்கு என்னமோ நிவேதிதா இன்சல்ட் பண்ண மாதிரி இருந்தது. இன்டெலிஜென்ட் லைக் யுவர் மதர் பெட்டர் but I leave it to the audience.
Recording is
இந்த கும்பகோணம் வம்பு தானே வேணாங்க.
Where is the mother's reaction to this?
Yes, ma'am, you should give your views on it.
Swaminathan, I will see you in court.
Which court, yeah? He will be in ITAT.
Amma, எங்க இருந்தாலும் follow பண்ணி we will harass him.
virtual.
அவர் பிச்சுதான் உட்கார்ந்திருக்க போறாரு.
Now we will make him come to Rajadi Bhavan. We'll meet him here.
ஆமா. Yes. எப்படிதாலும் harassment-க்கு is always a way. Don't worry. அங்க போய் பண்ணா போச்சு.
See today's Twitter bar and bench and live law. What happened in the Supreme Court today between Abhishek Manu Singhvi and the judges, and one lawyer started reading something in Hindi when a particular word was actually missing. The judge read it out and said, "Where is that word?" So the lawyer just laughed. Just for the heck of it, don't talk whatever you want to talk and start reading something which is not even there on the piece of paper that you're holding. And recently, the hottest topic is somebody said, ask Singhvi, you're charging 50 lakh rupees. What is this?
I was there in our WhatsApp group.
It started it, so I'm collecting that kind of money.
So thank you once again to all the participants for joining us. We will be hosting another webinar in a couple of days' time. Another
There will be conclusion by APS.
There's only one small thing I would like to say after hearing this is when you're talking about future generation, shall we rename the doctrine as grandparents' country?
That's also included. I think adults also included, la? That's also.
They will have longer life than the present generation.
Yes.
Sorry, please continue, Prithvi and APS, sir.
No, we can close.
Yes, sir. So thank you for joining us again. This will be uploaded in our YouTube channel. We'll share the link once it is uploaded. So thank you once again, Nivedita, and thanks all the participants for joining us today. Please stay